Hello, Theater 103 TAs. I'm going to walk you through adding quizzes and podcast quizzes and setting up podcasts for adaptive release. So, three different things. Um, we will start with reading quizzes because those are the easiest ones. I've already gone ahead and put up the first several reading quizzes, but I need for you to put the rest of them up. What you do is go to the content area on the Blackboard site. You go to reading quizzes here, click on that. And once they come up, you'll notice, right, all these are already deployed. And what I need for you to do is add quizzes 6 through 13. So the way to do this is under the assessment area, you're going to add an assessment. You choose test. It does not distinguish between test and quiz. And then you'll be taken to this screen which lists all of the existing tests that are available. And it'll say, do you want to create a new one? No, you want to add an existing one. So you need to scroll down and find Reading Quiz 6, Faustus. Click Submit. You don't need to do anything with the title. You don't need to create a description, but you do need to very carefully make sure you've checked all these boxes the way that they're supposed to be checked. Under test availability, yes, the link needs to be available. No, we do not need to make a new announcement. Multiple attempts are not permitted for reading quizzes. You do need to check forced completion. And you do need to set the timer to 0 hours and 10 minutes. Auto submit needs to be turned on, so it will save and submit automatically when time expires. Don't worry about the display dates, don't worry about the password, but do come down here and in the due date area, choose the date listed on the course calendar for the Faustus quiz. Reading Quiz 6 is due this year on October 7th, so you can type it in, you can find it on the calendar, either way is fine. October 7th, and always make it due at the beginning of class. Again, you can just type this in if you want. Either way is fine. 3 p.m. Last of all, include tests in Grade Center calculations. Leave that checked, and then students should get as feedback their score and their submitted answers. I do not want them to get the correct answers. If they get a question wrong, they need to figure out how they got it wrong. Presentation mode stays the same. Everything else stays the same. Click Submit. So, Reading Quiz 6, Faustus, will be up there. Now, it wouldn't hurt after you've done that to go back, click on the little down arrow, and do Edit the Test Options, and just scroll through everything one more time and make sure you got the date right, make sure you got everything right, because if it gets screwed up, it can be a significant challenge of us getting lots of emails at the last second, etc. So just scroll down and again, check all of the categories, auto submit, 0 hours, 10 minutes on the timer, don't worry about the dates, etc., etc. Okay, so once you've done that, you can submit it again. It won't reissue it or anything. So those are reading quizzes, which are the simplest. The more complicated stuff will be, and we'll jump back to the content area, and podcasts and podcast quizzes. So, and you're going to have to do these in stages, sort of jumping from one to the next. So we'll take a look at Theater 103, the podcast, and right now what I've done is hidden some of the podcasts so that they are only accessible via adaptive release. So right now you can see that the first one is enabled, so it's out there. The second one is available. The third one is available. And then so, right, podcast 2, episodes part 1 and 2 are there. Podcast 3, episode part 1 and 2 are there. And right now, you'll see availability item is not available. So, Theater 103, the podcast, needs to be made available. And the way we can make that available is edit it. This is pretty simple. And this is a two-step process. The first thing we need to do is just simply click yes on permit users to view this content, submit. So now if anybody jumps into this folder, they're going to be able to hear it. They're going to be able to see it. I don't know how they could hear inside the folder. Anyway, so now you can see that Theater 103 Episode 4 is available. And it doesn't tell you it's available, it just doesn't tell you that it's not available, right? So after you've done that, the next thing you need to do is set up adaptive release. Hold on. Adaptive release simply means that they cannot see this podcast until they have completed a set of circumstances that reveals it. And as you recall from previous years, the rules are you can't get the next podcast until you have gotten an 80% or better on the previous one. So we are currently working on podcast 4. I'm going to double check that because it's easy to forget. So I'm going to cancel here. Go back to my list and confirm. Blackboard's being really slow today. And say, okay, so this is the one that I just set up. Theater 103 Podcast Episode 4, Shakespearean Complex Plots. They shouldn't be able to see Episode 4 until they earned an 80% or better on the quiz for Episode 3, Part 2. So, you click on that little down arrow, go to Adaptive Release. Don't touch the date, don't touch the membership. The only thing you need to do is select a grade center column. And actually, it automatically selected the right one somehow. So, the grade center column is Podcast 3, Part 2. The percentage is greater than or equal to 80. Now, it looks like Blackboard is pulling in these parameters from last year's version of the podcast and podcast quizzes, but I still would like for you to go check and make sure that this is correct. But it should say the previous grade center column, which is the previous podcast quiz, percent greater than or equal to 80. Submit. And then we can see from there that Shakespearean Complex Plots, adaptive release is good, it's enabled, we're all set to go. So then the other thing you have to do is back in the content folder, you need to do the same adaptive release and quiz deployment thing for the podcast quizzes. So if you look in this folder right now, I have only deployed the first couple of podcast quizzes so far. So we are all the way up to podcast 3, part 1, and part 2. So now we need to deploy the quiz for podcast 4. So just like we did for reading quiz, go under assessments, deploy a test, choose an existing test, podcast 4 quiz, submit. If there's any text or description, just leave it there. And then we're going to go through the same kinds of things we did for the reading quiz with some important modifications. Make the link available, yes. Multiple attempts, yes. Unlimited attempts, yes. Force completion, set a timer, 0 hours, 10 minutes, auto submit on, and then choose the due date, which for podcast quiz 4 is 9/18. And as with all things for this class, the due date is, or the due time rather, is 3 p.m., start of class. Now, this is important. Please uncheck this. This test should not be included in Grade Center calculations, but we do want to give them feedback of the score and their submitted answers. Presentation mode all at once, then you submit. So that's step 1 with the podcast quizzes, is deploying the quiz to the podcast quiz folder. So we scroll down and yep, there it is. Great, fantastic. Now you need to do the adaptive release thing on it. So on the little down arrow right here, choose adaptive release. And we're looking at podcast 4 quiz, so that means they can't even see this quiz until they get an 80% or better on the previous one. Podcast 3 part 2, percent greater than or equal to 80. Submit. And the way you can confirm it is to see that Podcast 4 quiz is deployed. It says enabled adaptive release, and if you like, you can go in here and do adaptive release again and check. That's the story.